I want to talk to Ben Goessling right now, Vikings writer, of course, for the Star Tribune. Ben is in Atlanta right now, made a special detour this week. You can see the ATL in the background,
Yep.
so it's
Oh, it's back there
no
somewhere.
secret. Working just a general piece on Atlanta, or maybe someone else down there piquing our curiosity, Ben.
Yeah, I figured to come down here and do the Mike Hughes story, former Viking. But there's actually a few of them. Mike Hughes, Kyle Hinton, Storm Norton is here,
Come
and
on.
yeah, that's why we're here to do the story on those guys. No, obviously, the Kirk Cousins
Yep.
return to Minnesota is the big story this week. It has been the big story in Minnesota, and we figured with our stockpile of beat writers, we could send one off this week to come down to Atlanta to do the Kirk Cousins story. So I've been down here the last couple of days, talking to him, talking to players, talking to coaches just about his first year in Atlanta and what it's going to be like to be back in Minnesota on Sunday as the visitor for the first time in that stadium.
I want to hear your take on things. My take is this probably couldn't come at really a worse time for Kirk. He's
No,
coming off two pretty bad games. Probably the last one, his worst game of the year, unless you want to say the first game of the year was his worst game. That's debatable. But 4 interceptions in his last game, Ben. Enters this weekend as the NFL's leader in both interceptions and fumbles. That's not a great stat. Those are not things you want to lead the league in. Falcons are 6-6, now very much in the playoff race because the the NFC South is terrible.
they're in the hunt.
But they're in the hunt. They're probably still technically in the driver's seat.
They are.
But Kirk Cousins is always in the hunt.
Kirk is always in the hunt graphic.
Always in the hunt graphic. You can count on that. What do you make of this? And then, of course, I want to hear what you've reported down in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's just been really interesting to be down here because you're kind of hearing a lot of the same conversations that we had and asked about over the last 6 years. I mean, it's a lot of discussion of, and there's a different layer to it, I think, because of the Achilles, but it's a lot of discussion about the interceptions. It's do they still believe in him? Obviously, with Michael Penix sitting there ready to go, per his own words about it. A lot of discussion of things you've heard before of no two turnovers are the same story and everyone is its own entity. And, a lot of talk about the detail that he goes into and how he's the same guy every day and all of those different things. But I think the thing they are going to run into here is the mobility has been, I think, limited for him because of the Achilles. That's not a secret. His power on some throws, I think, it's certainly something that a lot of coaches got asked about this week and that he got asked about. Is he able to drive the ball and push off of that back foot the same way that he did before the Achilles? And then, just how does it go for him back in Minnesota, knowing that this defense is one that he's played, but also one that he's struggled with in practice. And I think this is a particularly difficult matchup for him because they make you process things. They make you hold the ball. The Falcons have had a lot of quick game. They've tried to get rid of the ball out of Cousins' hand pretty quickly, but not being able to move around a lot and not being able to probably drive the ball the way that he could in the past. I do think this makes this a really tough matchup for him to come home or come back to Minnesota, I should say, and go from there.
Well, and it's been a kind of a weird tenure from the jump, and we've talked about this plenty, obviously, but when they draft Penix, it's like the very thing he was hoping to escape here in Minnesota. Like, Minnesota made it very clear, like, we're going to draft a quarterback. Like, if you come back, it's basically for probably 1 year.
Yep.
And he kind of goes to Atlanta, A, because they give him a lot of money, but B, he's probably thinking, okay, I've got a little bit of a runway here. They have invested in me. I've got at least a couple of years. And then 6 weeks later, they draft not just a quarterback, but a quarterback who's got some years on him. Like, Penix is 23, 24 years old. He's one of the older quarterbacks in the draft, not a project, more or less a quarterback who's probably more ready to go, but he's got 2 years of guaranteed money. So it's been a weird kind of swirl. And now coming off a 4 interception game, Raheem Morris gets asked, is he still your guy? Like, it's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk this week down here about should he be the starter? Is he going to be the starter? They have stood by him and they have said he will continue to start, but those conversations probably aren't going away. In fact, I think if he goes and struggles again, given the fact they were 6-3, you're going to hear a lot of calls for Michael Penix here pretty quickly. And, how all of that will go, we'll see. But I think it's interesting to watch this thing turn because he has talked a lot about wanting the phrase he used was it's not the dollars, it's what the dollars represent. I mean, that's what he
Yeah.
talked about in January, that last day he was with the Vikings. And that means guaranteed money. Obviously, that has been the number one priority for Cousins and Mike McCartney, his agent, over the years. They have said, we don't need the long-term deals. We want guarantees that either make it so that the contract has to be renegotiated every couple of years, which usually leads to them getting another chance to get something they want, or it gives you insurance going forward because you were going to be in a team's plans. The Vikings were
Right.
fairly upfront with him, as I understand it, about we are probably going to take a quarterback. So
Mm-hmm.
if you come back here, you are in effect preparing your replacement or providing the bridge for your replacement. He said,
Right.
I don't really want to do that. I want more than 1 year guaranteed. The Vikings were not willing to go there. They were not willing to
Right.
guarantee all of 2025. That was a sticking point in 2023. It was a sticking point this year when they were talking to him about a deal. So he leaves for a deal that I thought, the way it was written, was meant to prevent him from ending up in the situation that he wanted to avoid in Minnesota. He gets 2 full years guaranteed. And then I think he has a big roster bonus in 2026 that becomes guaranteed next
Yep.
year. So in other words, if the Falcons were not going to give him that, they would have to turn him loose already in 2025, early in the 2025 league year, to avoid that happening. So they did that, and he's got a no trade clause too. They gave him everything. I think I wrote this after it got done. It was like a greatest hits
Mm-hmm.
anthology of the Kirk Cousins, Mike
Right.
McCartney deals with the
Yes.
Vikings. All of the favorites that they put in there were in this one, and the Falcons said yes to all of it. And then they actually were the team that surprised Cousins with the fact that they took their
Yeah.
quarterback. They gave him
Yeah.
a few minutes notice before the pick comes in. My understanding is that he was taken aback by that and was stung by that. So he is having to work
Yeah.
through all of that now. But they gave him the deal that he was looking for and the one that made him leave Minnesota. I don't know. I don't think he would say this out loud at this point or
Mm-hmm.
be terribly interested in discussing it. But if he had it all over to do again, would he have taken the deal the Vikings had on the table? I don't know. I wonder that because I think he's
Yeah.
going to end up in the same spot down here in a lot of ways. And I don't know if the Vikings would do it again, given what they've gotten from Sam Darnold at a fraction of the cost.
I'm fairly certain they wouldn't do it again based on
Yeah,
what Darnold has given them for 10 million
a
versus
lot of
what
hindsight,
Cousins is
obviously, but
costing. Yeah, exactly. They couldn't have known how this would turn out. Cousins couldn't have known how this would turn out. But the fact that the Vikings are 10-2, the Falcons are 6-6, and Darnold has statistically outplayed Cousins in almost every single way, and even with the eye test tells you that, brings a certain kind of storyline into this game as well. But
yeah.
I guess how maybe a couple more things before we go. One is, how do you think Andrew Kramer and I were talking about this earlier in the week? How do you think Cousins will be received at US Bank Stadium Sunday, and how do you think he will take all of whatever comes in to his kind of what personally, or kind
Yeah.
of how will he absorb all of that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I would expect it's a fairly positive reception. There may be some booing. I would expect that it'll be positive before the game and then very loud, very charged up
That
during
sounds
the
about
game.
right. Yeah,
That would be
yeah,
my guess at it. I don't think there's anything that he did other than taking the deal to leave that would leave people to boo him.
right,
Obviously, a leader, a guy that carried himself well in the community over his 6 years in Minnesota. The reasons people had issues with him were the fact that he was making a lot of money and they didn't feel like they got enough return on investment
right.
for those salaries. But I don't think there's going to be anything that people would look at with him and out and out be hostile toward him that way. But I do think there's going to be a lot of desire to beat him, to make him look worse the wear, probably, to make him seem like the Vikings are better off without him. I'm sure all of that stuff will be driven into how fans react to him during the game on
Hmm.
Sunday. He expects it. He said they're great fans. As a result, they'll try to make it as hostile as they can. I mean, certainly talking to people this week, this one does mean something to him. I mean, he kind of said it's another game. You go through this, but I remember in quarterback they talked about this when he went back to Washington the first time that
Right.
year. He said a lot of things, and I think Julie Cousins said a lot of things about how this one meant more because it was going back to the team where he had started his career, and I think they became a family there, and all of those things on a personal level meant a lot to him. That one was different because it didn't end quite as amenably, I guess,
Yeah.
or as it didn't end as nicely as the Vikings seemed to. So there was probably a little bit of prove it to the Commanders that they had made the wrong decision with him. I don't know that this has quite that same sting. There may be a little bit of that. I'm sure there's probably always a little bit of that, but I do know that there's a lot of sentimentality from his family towards Minnesota. He talked this week about having a lot of gratitude for the place, and I know his family is planning to head up early for the game, just to enjoy some time in Minnesota, to see some friends. He mentioned his old neighbor John Weber that
I was
shoveled
going to
his
say, is he going to get his
driveway.
driveway shoveled for old time's sake?
Yeah, I mean, he brought it up this week, so a lot
Yeah.
of those things, a lot of the familiar Kirk Cousins riffs were here this week. It all felt very familiar in that regard. So I think this does mean something to him. I think this game is going to mean a lot to him. Obviously, he and Kevin O'Connell are very close, and I think have stayed very close. So, all of those things add some complication to it, but there's also that desire to say, hey, we're doing fine without you. You made your decision. Good for you. We'll root for you the rest of the way, but we don't need you. And that's going to be probably true on his side and true on the Vikings side, I think.
Last thing, I know you're writing something bigger on this. Is this part of Friday's newsletter as well? People should sign up for that, obviously, regardless, but I imagine maybe some of this goes into that as well.
Yep. We've got, so we're going to have two different pieces. There'll be a story in the Sunday paper that will go online earlier, but then I wrote another insider for the newsletter that kind of looks at, really, I kind of went after this idea of who gave Cousins more of what he wanted. The O'Connell, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah regime, or the Mike Zimmer, Rick Spielman regime. Because when you look at it in the end, the love language that it seems to mean the most to Cousins, and this is true in the NFL in general, the love language that means the most in the NFL is guaranteed money. And the group that was always willing to give him guaranteed money was Rick Spielman, Mike Zimmer, probably to his own consternation over the whole thing. For all of the things we heard Zimmer say about him, the Vikings always came to the table and they always opened up the checkbook. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah gave him a 1-year extension, and then after that, they didn't do it again. It was the void years in 23, and then a discussion this year, but ultimately no deal. So they kind of said, we like you, but only to this level. We are going to praise you effusively when you're playing. We're going to kind of empower you in a way that Mike Zimmer did not do. But then when it comes to the bargaining table, there's going to be a ceiling to this. And I think that's ultimately a lot of the reason he's not here anymore, because they would not bend. I mean, this discussion, as I understand it, was the same in 23. It was the same in 24. And I think even to the same degree in 22, a little bit, where he wanted a longer term deal. They said no. He wanted it again at 23, but he also wanted guaranteed money through 2025. They said, we'll go through 24, but we're not giving you more than that. And then this year even was, I want 24 and 25 guaranteed. And they continued to say, this is where we are. We're not moving off of that. So ultimately, I think the reason we are where we are is because this regime was finally the one to say, we're going here, but no further. And that has been a change from, for all of the things said about Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer, they opened up the book basically every time the Cousins asked for it to happen, because they needed the cap space in some ways too.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to reading that. Look forward to reading the longer piece. Sign up for the newsletter, everybody. Ben, safe travels back. We'll see you soon, and we'll see what happens on Sunday.
Yeah, it should be an entertaining day at US Bank Stadium, so it should be a fun one to cover. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.